Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, the prince and princess got to go to Egypt, and the difference in cultures were like night and day. The princess loved it, and the prince, who had been there before, loved showing it to her. Then we had an eye-opening trial where the prince was accused of adultery. The queen took up for her son, but wished that the prince and princess would keep better company. So let's see what's going on today. The princess had done well with the Mordaunt scandal, but she was badly hurt by it. The prince had been foolish enough to write letters to a very attractive woman and to pay calls on her in private. Although he had cleared himself of the charge of adultery, all the world knew that he was anything but an ideally faithful husband. Being in the public eye, the princess and her husband had to live their married lives in the facade to show the world. The prince had been unfaithful time and time again, but on this occasion, when he had not in fact been unfaithful at all, he had exposed his wife to open shame and embarrassment. Sir Philip Magnew goes so far as to suggest that when the princess left for her usual holiday in Denmark, she intended to stay there for a long time, maybe indefinitely. The Princess of Wales, who had been deeply hurt by the Mordaunt trial, was in Copenhagen on a visit which was expected to last for a considerable time. The facts don't bear out this supposition. The Mordaunt trial was over by the end of February, and the princess did not leave England until July, the date which she might normally be expected to set off for her Danish holiday. She took the 3 elder children with her, but left behind little Princess Victoria and the baby Princess Maud, born November 20th, 1869, giving strict instructions that the baby's diet was to remain unaltered till her return. No devoted mother, such as the princess certainly was, would ever have left these instructions about an 8-month-old baby had she herself intended to be away for a very prolonged period. Nor does the Prince of Wales's behavior suggest that any serious rift existed between husband and wife. He insisted on accompanying the princess to Denmark, and he begged the queen to allow him to remain there for at least a week or 10 days. It was a favor which was not granted, but it didn't really matter because the princess's stay in Denmark turned out to be a very short one. On the 15th of July, the Franco-Prussian War broke out. In these circumstances, it was thought advisable that she return to England immediately. The princess was mad, but she told Princess Louise in a letter that she had no intention of quarreling seriously with my naughty little man. Princess Alexandra had written a letter to congratulate Princess Louise on her engagement to Lord Lorne. The princess wrote rather coldly, since neither she nor the prince approved of this match, which in fact proved a most unhappy one. But she softened a little towards the end of her letter. "You know, my pet, in me you will always find a true friend, whatever may happen." Personal feelings about the Princess Louise's engagement, combined with political differences over the Franco-Prussian War, to drive a slight rift between the Queen and the Princess. "Unity in the family is of great importance," the Queen wrote sadly to the Crown Princess. The autumn of 1870, the Prince and Princess's great interest was the reopening of the Sandringham house, now nearly entirely rebuilt. The new house was very much a home and not a palace. The original 18th century building had vanished, and in its place was a red brick Victorian Tudor mansion planned for comfort rather than for grandeur. Opulent it certainly was, but not magnificent. Because he had worked for the Prince Consort at Osborne and had collaborated with Greur in the designing of the mausoleum at Frogmore, the Prince of Wales had chosen Humbert rather than a well-known architect such as Salvin. The result was a solidly built house in Salvin's manner, but lacking in just that touch of distinction which marks much of Salvin's work. Bay windows let in plenty of light and air, and were the main features of the design. The house was a large one. Inside, the accommodation was inadequate. Prince Eddie and Prince George, for instance, slept in bedrooms the size of an average Victorian bathroom. The main rooms, however, were spacious and comfortable, furnished with contemporary furniture, some of it built in. Except for the trophies and curios which the prince brought home from his journeys, the pictures and ornaments were also, for the most part, of the same date as the house. There were no ancestral portraits and almost no antiques. Perhaps for this reason, Sandringham had none of the atmosphere of an English country house. The Prince of Wales liked to think of himself as an old-fashioned Norfolk squire, but his home was the typical home of a 19th century industrial magnate. The princess, as we know, had simple taste in her clothes, and house decoration she preferred a cluttered coziness. Ornaments were everywhere, varying from exquisite trifles by Fabergé. He was to make tiny models of all Sandringham animals, including even the farmland turkeys, two objects of no value whatsoever, except a sentimental one. In the great hall, a ferocious-looking stuffed baboon held out a tray on which visitors could drop their cards. This hall or saloon was the chief meeting place, a fine high room, comfortably furnished with a desk, a piano, and tables supplied with books and newspapers, a fitting center for a house where everything was large and handsome. Only the drawing room preserved a feeling of formality and protocol. In the dining room hung the set of Goya tapestries, which were Sandringham's great artistic treasure. Much of the life of the house centered around the billiard room and the bowling alley, one end of this alley being furnished in semi-oriental style, complete with hookahs to form an oddly amusing smoking room. In the princess's upstairs sitting room, the stucco decorations were copied from those she had so much admired in her room in the old Sandringham house. Her bedroom was fantastically crowded with photographs, holy pictures, little crosses, and mementos of every sort and kind. By her bedside, she always kept a small replica of Thorne Walson's statue of Christ over her bed. In the angle of the curtains draping the bed head, the carved head of a cherub hung above a large crucifix. The princess loved and lived in this house for the rest of her life. There were now 5 children in the Sandringham nurseries. The Princess of Wales was once again pregnant, a pregnancy which was affecting her as none of her previous ones had done. She tired quickly and became easily depressed, but she insisted on leading a normal, busy life, accompanying her husband everywhere, fearful perhaps as to what he might be doing were she not by his side. On April the 6th, 1871, she gave birth prematurely to her 3rd son. At Sandringham, nothing was ready. As on the occasion of Prince Eddie's birth, there was no nurse, no baby clothes, and only the local doctor in attendance. Although all went well and easily for the mother, the frail little baby, hastily christened Alexander John Charles Albert, but known in the family as John, only lived 24 hours. It's hard to lose a baby for any mother, and the princess's bitter grief was only to be expected. But what was more surprising was the Prince of Wales's reaction. The lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Stoner, described tears rolling down his cheeks, insisting on putting the child's body into the coffin himself, and carefully arranging the white satin pall in the piles of white flowers. From her bedroom window, the princess watched her husband walking in the short funeral procession hand in hand with his 2 little princes, Eddie and George, solemn in gray kilts, crepe scarves, and black gloves. When Queen Victoria heard the news, she kindly offered to come at once, an offer which the prince gently refused, pointing out that his wife must have complete rest and quiet. The princess herself added that she would wish the queen's first visit to Sandringham to be on an occasion of joy, not sorrow. Throughout her life, the loss of this little child was to be often in the princess's mind. On April the 6th, 1882, the 11th anniversary of the child's birth, she wrote to Prince George, "It is sad to think that nothing remains on earth to remind us of him but his little grave." It made her sad and depressed. She felt responsible for her baby's death because she had not taken sufficient care during the months preceding its birth. No modern doctor would hold her to blame. Overexertion and fatigue can perhaps cause a miscarriage, but not a premature birth. In all probability, the princess's babies were born before their time because she suffered from a hormone deficiency. Queen Victoria agreed with the princess's opinion, but being wise enough to blame the father rather than the mother, she asked her friend and advisor, Dean Wellesley, to speak to her son on the subject. The prince duly promised to take better care of his wife, remarking, however, that she is naturally very active in mind and body, and I'm sure a sedentary life would not suit her. Matters, therefore, went on much the same as before the birth and birth of little Prince John, for one significant change. Although the princess was yet only 26, from now onwards there were to be no more children. Then we come to the usual summer routine was varied this year by a visit to Oberammergau for the Passion Play. The prince and princess were so anxious to preserve their incognito that they did not reserve seats. They even asked their friends not to raise their hats or bow when they passed by them in the streets. The prince and princess were deeply moved by the play and by a conversation they had afterwards with the actor who had played Christus. The princess was reputed to have given him a ring in memory of the occasion, while the prince declared that he had never been so much impressed with anyone in his life. From Oberammergau, they traveled to Jugendheim, whilst the princess remained there in a large party of Hessian relatives. The prince went alone to Hamburg, where his gambling activities gave rise to some scandal. However, a sudden turn of fate was to silence all adverse criticism. At the end of October, the prince and princess went on a visit to Lord Londesborough's house near Searborough. Several people who had been at this house party, including 2 servants, were afterwards taken seriously ill. And on the 23rd of November, it was announced that the Prince of Wales was suffering from an attack of typhoid fever. The princess's reactions and the part she played was found in the unpublished letters of her dear friend and lady-in-waiting, Lady Macclesfield, who wrote almost every day to her husband, describing the ups and downs and the patient's condition and the behavior of the relations who came flocking to his sickbed. Princess Alice happened to be at Sandringham before the prince became ill, and she stayed on to nurse her brother, just as 10 years previously she had nursed her father. Lady Macclesfield's opinion of Princess Alice varied considerably. At first she was delighted to have her help and practical experience in illness. However, if Princess Alice was efficient, she was also domineering, and very soon Lady Macclesfield was complaining in another manner toward her sister-in-law. We're all furious at seeing our princess sat upon and spoken of as if she had not sense enough to act for herself. The princess had chosen the doctor and sent for Dr. Gullen and put him in charge of the case, although at the Queen's suggestion she agreed also to have Sir William Jenner, reckoned first rate for fevers, according to Lady Macclesfield. The princess was bent on doing all she could for her husband, though her deafness was a sad drawback in the sick room. She would only go out and take fresh air, if absolutely compelled to do so, by the doctors or Lady Macclesfield. And at night she lay down, but not to sleep, at a dressing room opening out of her husband's bedroom. On occasions, the doctors absolutely insisted she should leave the patient for the sake of her own peace of mind. I believe his ravings have been very dreadful, Lady Macclesfield wrote on the 29th of November, and that for that cause she was kept out of his room one day. All sorts of revelations were said of people mentioned. Face to face with death, the prince was sadly remorseful and impenitent. On one occasion, when half wandering, he told the princess that he was sure she would desert him now because of his past neglect. He addressed her as my good boy, and when she told him that she was his wife, he replied sadly, "That was once, but is no more. You have broken your vows." On 29th of November, Queen Victoria arrived, sent for personally by the Princess of Wales against Princess Alice's judgment. Only a few months before, Princess Alexandra wanted Queen Victoria to visit the house on an occasion for rejoicing. Now the 2 women greeted each other with tears. Prince Alfred was already in the house, the 18-year-old invalid, and Prince Leopold had begged to come but had been refused. Prince Leopold, poor boy, is so dreadfully anxious to come here, as he thinks he could comfort dear Alex, whom he idolizes. The day after the Queen arrived, the patient showed symptoms alarmingly reminiscent of his father's fatal illness. Now, for the first time, the princess broke down, almost distracted with grief and alarm. She quickly recovered herself. The princess's birthday, December the 1st, passed by without any celebration. The day afterwards, her husband, returning to consciousness, asked if it were her birthday. "What a shame not to have told me," he exclaimed, on being told that the anniversary was already past. In the middle of all her cares and anxiety, the princess did not forget Lady Macclesfield's own birthday on December 3rd, but presented her with a photograph and a crystal watch. Cheered up by the patient's return to consciousness and by other hopeful signs, the Queen had left Sandringham on the 1st of December. Everything seemed to be going well. On the 7th of December, the princess and Princess Alice actually dared to go out together for a drive over the snow and a sledge drawn by 2 gray ponies. In his apparent convalescence, the patient was more than ever dependent upon his wife, which made Lady Macclesfield the more anxious that they should be given the opportunity to be alone together for a while. But how Princess Alice is to be rooted out is not easy to see. I shall have a great deal to tell you on that subject. Suffice it to say for the moment that she's the most awful storyteller I've ever encountered. Meddling, jealous, and mischief-making. For a short time she is everything that is charming, but the less one knows of her, the better. So I will end the video here. In our next episode, we will find out that the prince is not out of the woods yet and has a relapse. So this episode had plenty of events happening, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The princess remained loving and caring toward her husband, who really put her through the ringer emotionally, and then when he became ill. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.